Stand Symposium, my presentation of the Silviculture Challenge, which should get the ball rolling. My name is Hughes. I'm the Forest Establishment Leader at the Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations in Victoria. I'm going to start with a little story. Back in the summer of 2002, Neil is not quite the fresh-faced lad, fresh off the university treadmill, but neither is he the grizzled professional you find today. I'm managing some typically brushy stands in the Chilliwack Forest District in Lake Huron. We've been forced to grow conifers back into an amazingly rich and productive site. This has just supported a great stand of red alder and maple, a hint of paper birch and Douglas fir, and I'm struggling with brushing treatments. However, I've done what I thought was an excellent basal bark treatment on the maple and birch, and I'm coming back 18 months later to do a quick walkthrough before doing the free grow survey that fall. The blocks are well stocked with vigorous Douglas fir, except for Charlie Cartwright's Sitka spruce trail, and poles should be good. But as soon as I get out of the truck, I can see things are not good. My fir is chlorotic, leader growth is diminishing, and some trees are being swallowed up by another vigorous and recovering deciduous layer. What the heck is going on? Fast forward about a month later, and I have Stefan and Harry out on site, and within 5 minutes, they happily tell me I'm looking at a serious case of Swiss needle cast plus some minor rap decline. Rap decline I've heard of, but what the heck is Swiss needle cast? Well, over the next couple of years, I get very familiar with this Swiss needle cast, as it infects almost all of my plantations, growing in rich and brushy sites that are now almost fir monocultures, because what else do you grow here when hemlock is not preferred, Sitka spruce gets weevils, and cedar has been eaten by the deer or the elk that the ministry introduced, and the district won't let me manage for deciduous. Welcome to the complexities of silviculture in an age of extreme uncertainty. So I'm not really going to talk to you about forest health for the next little while. So much as the silviculture of young stands, and some of the challenges we're facing for a whole range of reasons. As these challenges are large and will not be getting smaller anytime soon. Despite what many of you think, forestry is not a sunset industry in BC, and away from the lower mainland is a very important economic driver for the workforce in a whole host of ways. Some good, such as tree planters delivering a $250 million planting program during the COVID epidemic, bringing much needed income to hotels and businesses throughout the province, and some bad, such as the huge sums spent fighting fires during the summers of 2017 and 2018. And as I'll hopefully show you through the next 20 minutes, silviculture foresters and forest health experts are going to be possibly the most important part of the workforce as we move into an era when every log harvested is coming from a managed stand rather than from nature's bounty. We all know the wealth that has been created in BC over the last 100 years and is the ongoing economic driver today comes from the harvest of natural stands, both in the incredible old-growth stands of the coast to the lesser known but no less wonderful forests of the interior. However, even as harvesting has transitioned from old growth to second growth over the last 20 years on the coast, the silviculture industry has still been able to run around doing their business without too much scrutiny, bathing in the warmth of the thrifty mature stands of fir and cedar and hemlock, which would be nothing short of incredible thanks to massive amounts of site disturbance and lots of wildfire for regeneration, and then the simple ingredient of time, 60 to almost 100 years to develop volumes of 600 to 1,000 cubic meters per hectare or more. The question we're now asking is, will our work over the last 30 to 40 years stand up to the test of time and provide a smooth transition? Smaller piece size, more juvenile wood, less clear wood, and of course lower value. How do these issues influence silviculture thinking and decision making? What have we learned over the past 30 years in BC that we could use to be updating our practices with? One key aspect of this transition is that everyone will be in a different stage and for different reasons. If you're in Prince George, the harvest is still focused on old stands, as the quality and the value is there in these pine and spruce stands, or you're salvaging mountain pine beetle killed stands of old pine. They have had the added issue that pine beetle killed a lot of their mid-rotation stands that would shortly be coming online. stands that a lot of silviculture investments have been made into. However, if you're in Chilliwack, you're already heavily into second growth at the expense of a more decadent old growth profile with high access costs and relatively low value. Also, Chilliwack is one of the few places where actual planted and managed stands have already been harvested, although the majority of their second growth has still come from these older stands in natural regeneration. And as we make this transition into younger stands, or are stuck in the salvage of killed stands, one thing is becoming very obvious. You have to harvest more hectares to get the volume targeted. As someone who spent much of his career in low volume stands, I can attest to this and the high silviculture costs that come with it. As Dan Turner is going to tell you in his presentation, we've already harvested 32% of our THLB in the last 30 years. So by my simple arithmetic, we will work through it all in about 90 to 100 years. That sounds okay if every hectare could be harvested at that age. But this increasing area of young forest brings with it a whole host of forest management issues, which range from silvicultural to ecological to social, which I will now take a quick look at. So, what are the big picture challenges which have been developing over the last 20 years or so, and which seem to be increasing as each year goes by? Well, it starts with the endless chipping away at the THLB for the last 2 decades, with some massive reduction of stoning good measure, such as on the central and north coast of the Great Bear Rainforest. Although we may traditionally think about the mountain pine beetle and now wildfire impacts, it's sobering to realize the coastal AAC has been reduced by about 25% from where it was in 1990. Less hectares throughout the province puts more pressure on delivering from the remaining ones. In the Ministry of Forests, Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, it's sometimes hard to hear anyone in operations, stewardship, or practices actually talking about timber supply. So much is the pressure to focus on non-timber resources, everything from wildlife to recreation to cattle to cultural and social needs. A look at the organization charts today will show silviculture foresters and forest health experts outnumbered by biologists and other ists by about 10 to 1. That's very sobering. As for climate change, it's now entwined in just about everything we're doing, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. As less and less people work in forestry, as in just about every other industry and business, think automation, society in general is getting more out of touch and more able to be influenced by those who want to influence others from their perspectives. The recent shackling of the Resource Professional Association by those with an agenda is a perfect example. How much harder, I think more expensive, will it be for us to do our jobs without herbicides to help? I'm sure that will be coming soon. So, looking more closely at how climate change has influenced the amount of young cereal stage forest, those who are coastal foresters are not in the main pine belt may still be forgiven for not appreciating how it has impacted our landscape and our industry over the last 20 years. With 10 million hectares severely impacted and over 2 million basically killed outright, it's been a life-changing experience for many. Even after 2 wet or very wet summers, which have greened things up incredibly, it's still almost incomprehensible to consider just how much forest burned in 2017 and 2018. But it's going to result in an awful lot of additional young forest. So this table gives an indication of how much forest there is to consider in terms of reforestation, regeneration, at the very least just surveys to ensure they're coming back based on the mountain pine beetle and wildfire. At the end of the day, about 2 million hectares. And of course, this table depicts just what's inside the THLB, and the public in general have very little or no comprehension of the THLB or how much of the land base is actually not available for harvesting. This slide will illustrate how much work lies ahead for the ministry. A good portion of a career for some people, I'm going to say. Obviously, we will expect natural regeneration to take care of the bulk of it, And that makes it all the more important that for those areas of workup, we use the best practices and apply the best science around seed and seedling attributes. However, while the government's share of our provincial planting program grows, that of the licensees will be shrinking. We aren't really there yet because, as I mentioned, a lot of the volumes are now coming from low volume mountain pine beetle fire salvage, and so the actual area being harvested is actually still quite high, and seedling requirements are remaining high, especially when you factor in the increased planting densities of pine now being used. The harvest level is clearly falling steadily for another 10 years until we fully enter our midterm with a provincial harvest of around 50 million cubic meters. And so this leads me to the famous graph pointed out so often by Resource Practices Branch because it nicely illustrates our provincial silviculture program. The boom of the early 2000s, followed by the deep trough from the 2009 recession, which would have happened again now had it not been for the growth of the government-funded programs. And despite the slow decline of the licensee projections, these numbers are continuing to be pulled up considerably to ensure the silviculture industry remains strong in the province. Just what the long-term capacity of our system is, we really don't know yet. With 304 million trees to plant this spring, it was creaking at the seams and slippage occurred, and probably 5 to 6 million trees didn't get planted. I would suggest that the peak performance for our program is probably somewhere between 270 and maybe 290 million trees without additional resources and building up capacity, which is a far cry, as you can see, for the majority of the recent past, we've been under 250 million trees. So, with all this bare ground out there and a growing inventory of young stands, which seems to receive so much unwelcome attention, surely the quicker we can get the stands through the early establishment phase and into their teenage years, the better. As they said at Weyerhaeuser, the silviculture strategy is to get our regenerated stands onto an accelerated growth trajectory as quickly as possible. To which end, they did an awful lot of site prep, machine preparation, the use of pre-emergent herbicides, then post-emergent herbicides. They had an intense breeding program to improve genetic worth, and they used big bare root seedlings, and they fertilized. This certainly didn't solve all their problems, but it went a long way to ensuring their inventory was rolling along, keeping pace with all the young stands they were harvesting. Now, of course, here in BC, we can't manage our young stands quite so intensively. But with focus and a dedication to doing something better than the lowest cost solution, or good enough, we can continue to do okay and can definitely improve. Using best management practices to deliver site-specific prescriptions will go a long way to improving on blanket prescriptions, which should become widespread again. However, we're still not bad compared to some places. I had an amazing forester working for me for a while in Pal River, who went back home to Quebec and ended up with a job with a pulp mill company. We were talking on the phone a while later, and he told me, "Hey Neil, you should see how we do things here. None of this stratifying down to half a hectare. Unless there's at least a 5 hectare patch, it's all the same." Wow, that's interesting. So I had to say something else about forest health, as well as in my introduction. Although there seems to be a growing list of damage agents and an increase in area impacted, there is one thing we have on our side, and that's the fact that foresters really seem to get excited and concerned about forest health issues. In preparation for this workshop, I sent out an email to my cohort of stewardship foresters around the province, and I simply asked, what are the 3 major forest health issues that you see, and which one do you feel is the most concern? Instead of getting the usual 25% response pattern in about 10 days or 2 weeks, I got a 75% response within 2 days. So whether it's elk on Vancouver Island, Swiss needlecast in the Fraser Valley, or rusts in the northwest of the interior, foresters are paying attention and only too ready to roll up their sleeves and tackle the issue. And so we're getting establishment, do it as rapidly as possible, and our goal is to get full site occupancy, site capture, and canopy closure. That's the name of the game. Tree form and wood quality are things we can't take for granted in our managed stands, and our stocking standards and prescriptions must consider this carefully. No one here will be too surprised to hear that the species choice, establishment density, and species mixes are currently being very carefully reconsidered right now in the ministry following a fairly lengthy period where a growing number of professionals have been identifying issues around the province. Let's just say that minimums take a long time to capture the sight. These pictures, I think, give a pretty good basis for saying that this kind of a product isn't going to perpetuate BC's reputation as a timber supply giant around the world. And although it's a coastal example, these fast-growing but limby and off-site fir are suffering from abiotic impacts. This should have been a stand of hemlock, cedar, and balsam who wanted good sawlog material in a short rotation as a managed plantation. However, although the bioeconomy maybe won't care, will just grind it up and turn it into some kind of liquid soup, I stood in the camp that says BC's forestry strategy should continue to focus on high-value species and quality dimension lumber. We just can't compete with faster-growing areas in the world. So after we've carried out that rapid establishment, avoiding too many forest health issues due to the enthusiasm of our foresters, and we've greened up the vast areas of harvested stands out there, our next opportunity with managed stands is to carry out some incremental silviculture activities. Whether we want to add volume or reduce time to final harvest, both fertilizing and juvenile spacing can provide options. Those of us old enough to remember will recall that BC carried out tens of thousands of hectares of spacing through the 80s and into the mid-90s, until that fateful day that Reed Carter stood up and told us all that juvenile spacing was a bad investment and we should stop. Coincidentally, it coincided with the demise of FRBC, and to this day, FFT is extremely selective in what we fund, requiring a demonstrated return on investment. So not surprising then that the two situations on the coast that we still tick the boxes focused on high values and short rotations, red cedar and red alder. However, as we move into a paradigm of diminishing timber supply, who can say that spacing might not yet make a comeback as we try to shorten up rotations? Currently, the province also has a very active fertilization program, with the Forest for Tomorrow's program of around 20,000 hectares per year now being overtaken by the Forest Carbon Initiative's federally funded program for a total of around 45,000 hectares, which will be adding almost a million cubic meters of volume every year. However, as we said, a number of issues are building, and it seems the First Nations are increasingly opposed to the use of not just herbicides but fertilizing in their territory. And the general public doesn't seem to be too far behind, so who knows how much longer this will be going on. So, moving into the final section of the talk, I want to consider how science and innovation are developing new approaches specifically for silviculture and hopefully resulting in resilient forests. Some of these concepts have developed over the last 10 years or so, and others are brand shiny new. Foresters often debate if silviculture is a science or an art. And if I recall, we always end up agreeing it's a bit of both. These concepts that I'm going to talk about, I fully believe fit that conclusion. Ones you're probably aware of, enhanced basic silviculture concepts and integrated silviculture strategies are just two examples we've been working on for a while and identify how we're trying to up our game and to focus on improving our young stands and taking a bigger picture view of managing forests. Enhanced basic silviculture, I never did understand why we had the same stocking standards from the valley bottom to the mountain top. 900, 500, 400 seem to be just fine everywhere on the coast. And finally, through enhanced basic silviculture, the spotlight has been turned on to really looking at sites and figuring out what they actually need. Integrated silviculture strategies have grown from the Type 3, the Type 2, the Type 3, and the Type 4 strategies, taking a much more holistic view of what's going on inside the TSA and trying to, again, to focus silviculture activities to help support timber supply. A really positive step forward. While these two have been brewing for a while, the concept of full rotation regimes is much newer, at least within the ministry. Instead of having a stocking standard designed to get a block to a free-growing state, the concept is about a prescription to take a stand of trees from establishment to harvest and achieve a predetermined outcome. Although that might be 50 to 80 years for most species in BC, I've been lucky enough to spend much of my career working with red alder, and we built and have managed towards full rotation regimes the whole time. At this point, we have stands over 20 years old, having been juvenile spaced. They are within 8 to 10 years from being a valuable harvest again. Another concept could be that of focusing on a high initial density, using juvenile spacing and then commercial thinning to bring down the stocking, fertilizing, and then hitting a final harvest with again a predetermined outcome. A long way, I would say, have come a long way from where we were before. Finally, how does all of this young cereal forest that we're managing blend from a block level to a landscape level? For a very long time, we've been considering everything we do in terms of silviculture on a block approach, from stocking standards to dealing with wildlife tree patches. But more and more, we're coming to the realization that it's what happens at the landscape that might be more important. Is it the concept of cumulative impacts or just the increasing focus on non-timber resources I started with that is making us shift our focus away from the task in hand to the bigger picture? One issue close to my heart, and for that and many others, is how we manage deciduous species in our THLB. I've had managers who thought one alder in a plantation was too many, and they always drove around with a sound deck in the back of the truck just to make sure. But now we're wrestling with cover and forage issues for ungulates, all the way through to wildfire risk reduction and the suggestion that deciduous stands will reduce fire risk around communities. Landscape level approaches are here to stay, and I think will transform the way we think about forest health issues in our young plantations. And hopefully, that move to view things at a landscape level will help us get back to something that we believe our old growth forests displayed in abundance: a resilience to changing climates and to forest health effects. We're working on it in many ways, and there's an army of scientists out there, both in BC and around the world, working on pieces of the puzzle that should help us field foresters develop prescriptions and regimes which will recreate a resilient landscape and a timber supply. Think climate-based seed transfer and climate change informed species selection. Think wildfire risk reduction regimes, and then potentially managing forests to rebuild carbon stocks. All of these put together as part of the way we think to manage our forests will help us get to the end goal of recreating resilient forests, even in a younger age class distribution of forest. So with that, I'm going to end my talk and just have one more thing to say. We need more practicing foresters. I truly believe that the best solution to ensuring the health of our young forests is having more field foresters and forest health specialists trained, giving the opportunity to have a rewarding career working their way towards becoming experts in what is a challenging career. So now you're going to hear from the real experts about forest health issues.